So while it hopefully seems clear that theological notes and censures are useful for the magisterium in a formal context and useful for theologians who are formally engaged in the science of theology, what impact do these sort of things have on ordinary Christians? More than you might think. So faith is many things, but it's an obedience. Scripture talks about the obedience of faith. By faith, we submit ourselves to God, including our intellect. And that's a voluntary submission moved by God's grace. So we accept as true what God has said because God has said it. Not because we see for ourselves why it's true, but because God has said it and we believe that whatever he says is true. And by similar token, whatever necessarily derives from that is also something we have to accept, because the truth of our faith can't be separated out from the rest of our lives. So something like theological notes helps us to see the fact that there are things to which we owe our assent. There are things that we owe belief to, things that we owe acceptance to. And that's an unpopular idea in the world today that tells us we're allowed to believe whatever we want and think whatever we want. But theological notes remind us of the importance of the obedience of faith. That God has sent his Son into the world and has revealed certain things to us, and that we must accept those things. At the same time, also, the use of theological notes can help us to remember that not every opinion that has been promoted within the church, even if it's a good opinion, is necessarily absolutely binding on us. So there is legitimate diversity within theological schools of thought. So what the Thomist school holds in one area of theological opinion, Christians might be free to accept or not accept, or to hold alternative opinions. What other schools of thought hold might also be open for discussion and things like that. So at the same time that we recognize the obedience of faith, because faith is seeking understanding through the science of theology, theological notes help us to understand exactly what is binding and how binding is it, and where do we have room for disagreement, and what can help us to move our understanding of our faith forward. And that trickles down and has an impact on real Christians in everyday life. So when people are learning their catechism, for example, they're learning the church's teaching at a variety of levels, and they're learning a way of understanding their faith in kind of a practical way. And theological notes are behind the scenes in all of that, making sure that what the faithful are being taught and what we're experiencing is an accurate representation, even if it might develop some in the future. So theological notes do a lot of work behind the scenes, as we know what exactly is definitive, where is there room for development, where is there room for disagreement, and things like that. So one example of an area where theological notes are helpful today is discussions about human origins, evolution, the age of the universe, the early chapters of Genesis, and so forth. So the church has given us certain things that are definitely definitive teaching as far as the creation of the world goes, the creation of human beings, the creation of life, and so forth. And in other areas, we have some more freedom to explore and to discuss. And theologians are actively putting forward opinions and theories, some of which might be revised, some of which might be firmed up in the future. And behind the scenes in all of that, theological notes are helping us to identify what is definitive, what is certain, what is pretty certain, and where do we have room for further discussion. So the relationship between the obedience of faith and the profundity of the truth and the richness of our faith. Sometimes people think that the Catholic Church has everything spelled out for us in the finest detail in black and white. And when you learn your catechism, you think, this is it. But when you study the science of sacred theology, you realize that the truth is much bigger and that there is a huge amount of diversity within speculative theology, different schools of thought, different ways of approaching the same question. And so although there are certainly definitive parameters that we have to accept based on divine revelation, as we seek to understand the implications of those things and to see how the truths of our faith fit together, theologians have a great amount of freedom. So theological notes help to safeguard what has to be safeguarded, and by doing so, give us a foundation to explore much more deeply the great truths of our faith. One of the problems that theology gets into today is when it seeks to overturn definitive teaching. So to change definitive church teaching on certain topics. And in doing so, theology ends up in a dead end. That is, it keeps rehashing the same tired ideas over and over again and never gets anywhere. Theological notes, in contrast, by identifying for us what is settled, what is certain, and the place that certain truths hold within the analogy of faith, within the web of what we believe, that allows theology the freedom that it needs to explore new areas, to draw out new implications, to look at how the truths of our faith connect to one another, and so to make fruitful progress. So theology is not about trying to create a new foundation for our Catholic faith over and over and over again, but it's about always deepening and advancing our understanding of the faith. So theological notes are very much at work behind the scenes by telling us what is foundational and what is definitive and what is certain, and therefore allowing the freedom for a great diversity of opinions as theology seeks to explore in a more profound way the great truths that are out there. The truth is much bigger than we realize. And if we are always digging up the foundation, we're never going to realize the broad horizons that are available to us. So theological notes help theology to be secure in what has to be secure and to have the freedom to explore what can be explored.